Coming up on Arirang News, the top diplomats of the United States and China start their first meeting with a tense exchange. Both sides dispensing with the icebreakers and taking aim at each other's policies in front of the cameras. The South Korean Finance Ministry says demand is still weak in the local economy, but for the first time in 9 months, its monthly report does not refer to uncertainties. And the man accused of killing 8 people this week in the U.S. city of Atlanta has waived his right to appear in court to hear the charges against him and be advised of his rights. President Biden has ordered flags to be half-mast for the victims, 6 of whom were of Asian descent. It's 5 p.m. here in Seoul. Thanks for tuning in to Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. The top diplomats of the U.S. and China had a tense exchange to start 2 days of meetings in Alaska. With cameras present, the U.S. Secretary of State told his counterpart that he would be bringing up deep concerns about issues including China's treatment of Hong Kong and Taiwan. China's top diplomat responded immediately and accused the U.S. side of being condescending. Kim Ji-yeon reports.
The first in-person meeting between U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and his Chinese counterpart Yang Jie-chi in Anchorage, Alaska, started with a back and forth of fiery exchanges. Ahead of Thursday's meeting, Blinken hurled criticism at Beijing's actions, saying they threaten a rules-based order that prolongs global stability, which Washington works hard to maintain.
We'll also discuss our deep concerns with actions by China, including in Xinjiang, Hong Kong, Taiwan, cyber attacks on the United States, economic coercion toward our allies. Each of these actions threaten the rules-based order that maintains global stability. That's why they're not merely internal matters and why we feel an obligation to raise these issues here today.
Beijing fired back, saying the U.S. has been using its military and financial clout to pressure other countries and instigate conflict by interfering in other nations' internal affairs.
In front of the Chinese side, the U.S. does not have the qualification to say that it wants to speak to China from a position of strength. Well, the American people are certainly a great people, but so are the Chinese people. So have the Chinese people not suffered enough in the past from the foreign countries? Well, as long as China's system is right with the wisdom of Chinese people, there's no way to strangle China.
Blinken and Yang are joined by U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and Chinese State Councilor Wang Yi for a 2+2 meeting. Among a number of agendas there to discuss include the denuclearization of North Korea, as well as U.S. sanctions on Chinese telecom companies. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
And senior diplomats from Seoul and Washington sat down today to discuss the North Korea nuclear issue as the Biden administration puts together its policy. The day before in Seoul, President Biden's Secretaries of State and Defense met with their counterparts and reaffirmed that the North's nuclear and missile programs are a priority. Yoon Jung-min reports.
In Friday's meeting with U.S. Acting Assistant Secretary for East Asian and Pacific Affairs Sung Kim, Seoul's chief nuclear envoy Do Gyu-duk discussed North Korea issues at a working level, apparently to add momentum to the Biden administration's North Korea policy.
Establishment of peace on the peninsula is the top priority of my government's foreign and security policy. I hope we will be able to have another round of productive and meaningful in-depth consultations on the North Korean nuclear issue at the working level.
Do added that he hoped to come up with a common strategy toward North Korea through the meeting, while Kim reiterated the importance of Seoul's involvement in reviewing the policy toward Pyongyang.
As Secretary Blinken emphasized yesterday and the day before, we greatly value input from the Republic of Korea as we undertake this important comprehensive review of our North Korea policy.
The meeting was a follow-up to the meeting by top diplomats and defense chiefs from Seoul and Washington the previous day. In Thursday's joint statement, the foreign affairs and defense chiefs reaffirmed that North Korea's nuclear and ballistic missile issues are a priority for the alliance. Seoul's National Security Office chief said Friday that during the in-depth talks on Thursday, the American official said the U.S. would closely consult with South Korea in its policy review toward North Korea. The two sides also agreed upon reinvigorating the trilateral cooperation between Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo on Korean Peninsula issues. National Security Advisor Seo Hoon plans to visit Washington in the future to continue talks. The top office said the two sides reaffirmed the strong Seoul-Washington alliance and will continue close communication, including at the summit level. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
North Korea says it's cutting diplomatic ties with Malaysia after a court there ruled that a North Korean man can be extradited to the United States on money laundering charges. Choi Jong-yoon reports.
On March 9th, Malaysia's top court ordered the extradition to the United States of a North Korean businessman. In response, North Korea on Friday said it would cut diplomatic ties with Malaysia. In a statement published by its state-run media KCNA, Pyongyang's Foreign Affairs Ministry called the extradition a nefarious act and unpardonably heavy crime, adding Malaysian authorities have forced North Korean citizens into being sacrificed for Washington's hostile moves. The ministry also warned Washington it would, quote, pay a price, while saying Malaysia's action had entirely destroyed the foundation of the bilateral ties built on the respect for sovereignty. A 56-year-old North Korean Moon Chul-myung had been arrested in 2019 after the U.S. accused him of money laundering and supplying prohibited luxury goods to North Korea. He has rejected the charges, claiming the arrest was politically motivated. Malaysia's once close ties with Pyongyang severely deteriorated after North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's estranged brother Kim Jong-nam was murdered at Kuala Lumpur airport in 2017, with North Korean agents believed to be behind the killing. Malaysia later expelled the North Korean ambassador from the country and closed its own embassy in Pyongyang. As Pyongyang statements come after Washington's top diplomat and security chiefs visited South Korea and discussed policies towards North and its denuclearization, any talks with Kim's regime could be further stalled. Choi Jong-yoon, Arirang News.
For the first time in 9 months, South Korea's finance ministry has chosen not to refer to uncertainty in the real economy in its latest report, but it did say that domestic demand in the pandemic is still sluggish. Kim Jae-hee has this report.
South Korea's Ministry of Economy and Finance omitted the word uncertainty from its monthly economic Greenbook report released on Friday.
We've been using uncertainty surrounding the real economy since July last year through February. We've deleted the expression for the first time in 9 months. That's not because we think all uncertainty has disappeared, but we are taking into account the overall trend of the real economy and the global economic outlook.
The report highlights that South Korea has recently seen rise in exports and fewer job losses. While the ministry assessed that domestic demand still remains sluggish due to the pandemic, it pointed out this sluggishness has shown signs of easing since February. Key economic indicators show domestic card spending in February was up 8.6% on-year, marking on-year growth for the first time in 3 months. Retail sales in January were up 1.6% compared to December last year, thanks to rise in sales of durable goods like cars and clothes. Sales by department stores in February were up almost 40% compared to a year ago, marking the steepest on-year rise since monitoring began in 2005. This is mainly attributed to the base effect, but an expert notes there could be other reasons.
The pandemic erupted in February last year in our country, so the base effect did contribute to the rise in sales at department stores last month. But that might not be the only reason. The urge to spend, which has been suppressed for so long amid a prolonged pandemic, seems to be erupting now, with the vaccine rollouts beginning.
Consumer sentiment also improved. CSI in February was up 2 points a month to 97.4. Exports in February grew 9.5% on-year to around $44.8 billion, thanks to robust demand for memory chips and automobiles. And although the number of jobs was still down on-year in February, the decline was less pronounced in January. The ministry was also optimistic regarding external factors, but expressed concern over financial market volatility.
Externally, expectations rose for a global economic recovery due to vaccine rollouts and massive stimulus measures in major economies. However, financial market volatility has expanded due partly to concerns over inflation.
The ministry pledged to continue to reduce internal and external risks and work to achieve an economic recovery in a timely manner. Kim Jae-hee, Arirang News.
The South Korean government and ruling party are considering making all public sector workers report any real estate they own to prevent them from engaging in illegal land speculation. At a meeting Friday, the acting leader of the Democratic Party, Kim Tae-yeon, said a strong supervisory organization needs to be set up to monitor the market and to crack down on any illegal activities. Referring to the land speculation scandal involving employees at the State Housing Corporation, LH, Prime Minister Jung Se-kyun said the government will make LH more transparent and reduce its power. Electric vehicle manufacturers have been announcing plans to slash battery costs and, where possible, make them in-house. Our business correspondent Seon Kyung has more.
Volkswagen has announced plans to increase its battery cell production for electric cars and produce its own batteries. The German carmaker said on Monday local time it will establish 6 battery factories with its partners in Europe by 2030. Starting in Sweden and Germany, the company expects to secure the supply of batteries for its brands and produce battery cells with an energy value of 240 gigawatt-hours per year. It also presented a plan to develop a new unified prismatic battery cell, which is planned to be rolled out in 2023 and applied to as much as 80% of its electric vehicles in 2030.
New chemistry and manufacturing processes will reduce battery cost by up to 50%. This will make e-cars even more affordable and, as a result, even more attractive.
Before Volkswagen made its move, Tesla announced its plan to reduce its reliance on outside suppliers for batteries. Last September, the company said it had designed and was producing its own battery cells at a facility in Fremont. Tesla also unveiled a plan to sharply reduce battery pack costs within 3 years. In accordance with the plan, it agreed to acquire German ATW Automation, a supplier which assembles battery modules and packs, last October. Tesla CEO Elon Musk claimed that within 3 years, the company can produce $25,000 full self-driving cars. Another leading automaker, Ford, also mentioned it looked into the possibility of making its own battery cells and packs last November. Market observers say the electric car makers' in-house production plans would put pressure on suppliers to lower prices and therefore bring down overall battery costs. Seon-kyung, Arirang News.
One of the new SUV models made by Genesis, a division of Hyundai Motor, has been given the highest possible safety rating from an American insurance research institute. This is for the Genesis GV80, the model Tiger Woods was driving last month when he miraculously survived a serious crash. The Insurance Institute for Highway Safety subjected the GV80 to a rigorous regime of crash tests, and it gave it top marks on all 6 criteria, which cover safety aspects of the vehicle's structure, protections for passengers, drivers, and pedestrians, and crash prevention systems. Time now for an in-depth look at the market news on this Friday, and for that I'm joined on the line by Mr. Daniel Yu, Global Strategist at Yuanta Securities. Mr. Yu, thank you for joining us today.
Good afternoon.
Well, the monetary supply in Korea we now see as of January in terms of M2 had risen to more than 3.2 quadrillion won. That's around $2.8 trillion. This is according to the Bank of Korea, which says that in the pandemic, small and medium-sized companies in particular have been taking on loans and big companies issuing debt. Tell us about that phenomenon and what do you make of it?
Yes, as you said, Korea's M2 stood at 3.2334 quadrillion won, which is amounted to $2.8 trillion US dollars as end of January, which is up by about 1.3 percentage point from a month earlier. And that is YOY number. It's about 10.1% increase. Clearly, this is a trend that you are seeing in a global scale everywhere. If we look at U.S. market, U.S.'s M2 growth rate is at 25%, 26% level. So clearly, Korea is also showing two-digit growth rate of such. This is all because of the COVID-19 implications that the economy is undergoing quite a weak domestic consumption period. So therefore, the banking sector needs to provide additional loans. And obviously, this is actually making the M2 numbers, which is a money supply that counts cash, demand deposit, and other near-term money, and which can be easily converted to cash, obviously is growing at a very rapid pace with the government actually printing additional money. If you look at the monetary policy-wise, Korea's interest rate is at now 0.5%. This is lowest level that we ever seen. U.S. rates being at 0 to 0.25%. Korea is actually slightly higher, but it is probably the lowest that we ever seen. So clearly, the liquidity condition is very ample. Government is trying to do everything possible to boost the economy. Clearly, the monetary policy is very very easy to benefit the overall consumers as well as corporations.
And now turning to stocks, Wall Street was down on Thursday by quite a bit, especially tech, the 10-year Treasury yield surging to above 1.7%. What's going on in the markets, especially in view of the reassurance we seem to get from the Fed yesterday?
Right. If you look at the U.S. market, it's down quite significantly with the interest rate rising rapidly. If you look at the 10-year government bond rate of U.S., it hit 1.75%, which is the highest level that we have seen in a while. And this is a continuation of a 7 straight week of rise that you are seeing. With this high rise of 10-year bond rate, clearly this was quite a negative implication for the U.S. growth stocks, particularly the NASDAQ. NASDAQ was down by over 3%, and also now actually affected quite negatively on the small mid-cap stocks as well, which was down by about 2.9%. All in all, the market did lose quite a bit, of 0.5% for Dow and 1.5% for S&P 500. I think that this is a implication where it's coming because of the futures and option closing date of today, that quite a lot of the retail investors invested heavily on NASDAQ futures and options long, and that created some of these changes or the implications that, volatilities that's causing right now. We think that this volatility will probably dwindle down. Also, the interest rate that you are seeing at 1.7% will probably stabilize in the future. We don't think that inflation pressure is so significant that it will trigger continuation or rise for the 10 years bond rate. We think that it should be able to stabilize around 1.6, 1.7%. The timing for reaching 2% level would probably take at least next 12 months. Because of the inflation pressure is not as strong because of the consumers' labor costs rising is actually quite timid.
And it seems the same issues much on the minds of investors in Korea. The Kospi down today, but again on the Kosdaq, strong buying by individual investors. Tell us about the local market.
Right. Even though U.S. market declined so sharply, the Kospi kind of stayed quite okay with dropping by about 0.86% only, and also Kosdaq was up about 0.24%. As you heard earlier, that the liquidity condition of Korean market is very strong, ample liquidity affecting positive inflow to the equity market, and domestic retail consumers are continuing to buyer of the Korean equities. Of course, there's a concern about the COVID-19 cases that KDCA reported 463 more new cases, and that number is not going down. It continues to show around a daily basis of over 400 kind of, affecting that the sentiment being continued to be weak. And it seems that that's applied to many other countries, that COVID-19 is not going to go away as quickly as people hope for. And that would result into continued weak domestic consumption numbers. However, though, the export numbers are continuing to be very strong. Korea's dependency, or Korea's focus on the semiconductor business and the electric cars and automobiles, we think that these are very good areas where the domestic demand as well as overseas demands are very strong. So therefore, overall earnings growth rate for Korean Kospi and most of the other companies that relates to the export will show very strong growth rate of earnings this year. We are looking at least 20% plus of the earnings growth this year, and then next year will probably rise by another 15% or so. If this continues, then obviously Korean market is not going to be weak for a long time. We think that after this options and future closing date of U.S. market would start to show rising trend again for U.S. as well as Korean market.
Got it. All right, Mr. Yu, thanks so much for sharing your expertise with us today, as always, and have a great weekend.
You too. Thank you very much.
South Korea has now given first doses of COVID-19 vaccines to almost 660,000 people. Second doses will start for people getting the Pfizer vaccine this weekend. Meanwhile, new coronavirus case numbers today are still in roughly the same range they've been in for months. Han Sung-woo has the details.
Over 82% of priority recipients in South Korea for February and March have received their first doses of the COVID-19 vaccine. The Korea Disease Control and Prevention Agency reported Friday that 17,501 more people have received their first dose of the vaccine, raising the total to 659,475, or about 1.27% of the entire population. Close to 610,000 people have received the AstraZeneca vaccine, and over 51,000 have received the Pfizer vaccine. From the 20th of March, Pfizer recipients will begin receiving their second doses of the vaccine, starting with those working in COVID-19 medical care units. Experts say most of them will have enough antibodies 2 weeks after their second dose to be immune. Considering the National College Entrance Exam in November, the Ministry of Education is pushing to get high school seniors and their teachers vaccinated over the summer. There have been a total of 9,607 cases of suspected adverse reactions to the shots in the country, including 8 new reports of anaphylaxis.
We ask vaccine recipients not to go to the emergency room if they experience pain on the arm, muscle pain, or a fever on the day of vaccination or the day after. Even after vaccination, there's the risk of getting infected by COVID-19 before antibodies are formed.
Meanwhile, with cluster infections springing up nationwide, Korea reported 463 new COVID-19 cases on Friday. All but 22 were locally transmitted, with Seoul and the surrounding area accounting for 320 of them. South Korea's total number of cases now stands at a little under 98,000. The virus has killed 2 more patients, raising the death toll to 1,690. Han Sung-woo, Arirang News.
The man suspected of killing 8 people in Atlanta, including 6 women of Asian descent, has waived his right to a first court appearance to hear the charges and his rights. President Biden has ordered flags to half-mast and will be meeting with members of Atlanta's Asian American community on Friday. Kim Do-yeon reports.
Aaron Long, the man suspected of this week's killing spree in Atlanta, Georgia, has waived his right to his first appearance in court. This step of the judicial system is when a defendant is advised of the charges facing them and the judge decides whether the arrest was justified. Long has been charged with 8 counts of homicide and 1 count of aggravated assault. Of the 8 murdered, 6 were Asians, with 4 of Korean descent. The federal government has joined the mourning for the victims. President Biden directed that flags on federal grounds be flown at half-staff through Sunset Monday as, quote, a mark of respect for the victims of these senseless acts of violence. In addition, President Biden will be going to Atlanta Friday for pre-planned COVID-19 related business, but he's decided to also meet with Asian American community leaders while he's there. The Asian American community is calling for justice, but the motive behind the shootings remains unclear.
We are looking at everything to make sure that we discover and determine what the motive of our homicides were. I'm not sure about any mental illness. All we do know is that he did purchase the gun the day of the incident.
Regardless, across the U.S., the mass murder has sparked anger and fear in many Asian Americans, especially for this Asian resident from Atlanta.
You know, I haven't experienced like a physical attack or any harassment like that, but I'm definitely more cautious because it could happen. Just like the shooting that we saw, you know, it could be a normal day and something could blow up like that. With this movement of speaking out, I feel more empowered to talk about it. I just feel like with more incidents that are happening, we're finally speaking out, and
other minority groups are joining hands with Asian Americans to call for justice.
Because if you justify hate to anyone, you justify it to everyone. And we that have been the targets of hate should not let our Asian American brothers and sisters stand this alone.
Data shows that crimes against Asians are becoming more commonplace in the U.S. According to the Center for the Study of Hate and Extremism, attacks against people of Asian descent in 16 American cities rose 149% in 2020 compared to 2019. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
And that does it for this newscast. Thank you for watching.